Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ontario's Water Security, a series of videos from the Coalition of Ontario Water Guardians. Today, we are extremely fortunate to have David Crombie to join us and speak on the issue of water security. The coalition itself works to maintain and improve water security in Ontario. By that, we mean safeguarding reliable access to clean water, which is the basis of the ecological integrity, public health, social equity, and economic vitality of Ontario. We have a fairly extensive website. It's not rocket science, Coalition of Water Guardians, COWG.ca, that you're welcome to look at your convenience. Today, as I mentioned, we're really fortunate to have David Crombie with us. Mr. Crombie is a former mayor of Toronto and served as a federal cabinet minister in 3 portfolios under 2 prime ministers, Joe Clark and Brian Mulroney. But he's perhaps as well known or more known for his work following his federal cabinet positions, working in environment and sustainability. He has a broad range of experiences, from being the chair of the Royal Commission on the Future of the Waterfront through to being a founding member of the Friends of the Greater Golden Horseshoe. In the middle, he has chaired the Greenbelt Council, and he chaired the advisory panel on the Coordinated Land Use Planning Review and its amazing report, Planning for Health, Prosperity, and Growth in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So without any further ado, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Crombie, and I have 3 questions. I'm sure we're all anxious to hear his comments. The first one is, as I mentioned earlier, there was the incredible Planning for Health, Prosperity, and Growth in the Greater Golden Horseshoe report from a committee that Mr. Crombie, a commission that Mr. Crombie chaired. It was hailed by most Ontarians for its perspectives on integrating improved flood protection, urban form and density, and climate change into land use planning. While those aspects are well known, we're asking Mr. Crombie, David, if you could please take a moment and remind our viewers about the panel's perspective on the importance of sound watershed management and to what the Coalition of Water Guardians refers to as water security.
I'll do my best, Andrew. Let me say that the commission and report you were talking about was done between 2015 and 2017, and it was an attempt to bring together 4 basic plans that command the planning of the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And those 4 plans were the Niagara Escarpment Plan of 1985, the Oak Ridges Moraine Plan of 2002, the Growth Plan the Green Plan of in 2005, and the Growth Plan in 2006. I'm just reciting those because it's not as if we started off with a clean sheet of paper. Our job was to bring together those 4 plans and use similar language and make recommendations to make them better, in the course of which we made 87 recommendations. One of the things that was noted by many people, which was clear to us at the beginning, was the position we put climate change in. We had a number of categories, agriculture, so on, so forth, and most people expected we would put climate change in as one of the categories of consideration. We didn't do that. What we did do was take all of the other categories and wove the impact of climate change on each one of those, whether that was agriculture or the wetlands or whatever it might be. We wanted people to understand that climate change animates all land use and environmental planning. And that became one of the things that distinguished it from other reports. A second thing I would say is that we always think that somehow the problems we're dealing with today started just not so long ago. But the whole idea of dealing with watershed planning and worrying about water quality, water security, all of that has been with us a very, very long time. In the modern age, I have in my home a little map and a study that was done during the Second World War, 1943. And it was talking about the region around Toronto and recommended that there be a green belt. Can you imagine that? That's 80 years ago. And so that also animated and found itself into two really important acts. And that was in 1946, the provincial government, a conservative government, I might say, the conservative government of the day passed two acts, the Planning Act of Ontario and the Conservation Act, which established the conservation authorities. Think about that. What it did do was have people understand that land use planning and environmental planning were the same thing. There were two acts, and the Conservation Authority was put in power to make sure that we were doing environmental planning while we're doing land use planning. That reflected also, I'm sorry when I get into history, my grandchildren just roll their eyes, but history teaches us, and history matters whether we're paying attention or not, okay? So in 1970, we had a thing known as a Toronto-centered region plan, which was an attempt to get that green belt around the Toronto area. And then in 1954, because of Hurricane Hazel and the enormous devastation that occurred, the conservation authorities were strengthened by legislation in 1954. In the 1990s, the waterfront Toronto discussions ended up with a report called Watershed. That was the name and title of it, because people understood in writing that report that if you want to deal with the quality of water security, you have to begin at the headwaters of where all these things begin. And that's the Niagara Escarpment, that is the Oak Ridges Moraine. So I wanted to pack all that in, if I could, to have people understand that there's a long, long history to understand the importance of watershed planning that gives us water quality and water quantity. And one of the important things to really understand, that's the beginning. As soon as you understand watershed planning, going to the headwaters of the creeks and the rivers, then you begin what I used to call the symphony of nature, because that's then it connects you to wetlands, it connects you to woodlots, it connects you to all of those things that are important to natural life. And therefore, everything being connected to everything else, you have to understand that you get water security by paying attention to environmental and land use planning from the headwaters on down.
Thank you, David. That's certainly a wonderful way to express policies that we're focused on, and people's eyes glaze over. You're absolutely right. And your ability to talk about the symphony of nature is a great way to open those eyes and make more people understand and care about this very important issue. Following the report of the panel, you became chair of the Greenbelt Council. And in addition to supporting numerous government initiatives with the wise reports that you circulated widely and that I enjoyed thoroughly, you also expressed significant concerns about some of the government's the direction in which some of the government initiatives were headed. And that included the minister's zoning orders, changes to wetland protection, and the mandate of conservation authority. And also the emerging trend to swap out urban density for urban sprawl. The government's direction was of such momentum, and they didn't pay heed to your kind suggestions, that you and several members of the panel, Greenbelt Council, unfortunately resigned en masse due to the government lack of compassion. And indeed, in your personal resignation letter, you referred to the government's approach to land use planning as carpet bombing. I'm wondering if you could just take a minute to refresh the memories of all of our listeners today about some of those concerns that the council expressed about watershed health.
I'll certainly try to do it in a kind of short order, but I need to start off with something. It's not in my nature. I'm not critical of other people. I try to be as cheerful about life as I can. But I can tell you that this is a government that, in my judgment, the likes of which we have never seen. This is a government that has absolutely no real honest respect for the forces and assets of nature. The benefits of nature are lost on them. They think it's all in the road of land development. And so that's the basic understanding we got when we were there. We made recommendations. They didn't bother looking at them. They were on to some other agenda other than what we were asked to do. And so you saw that clearly when the early legislation that began to weaken, really seriously curtail the work of the conservation authorities. They undermine the authority and mandate of the conservation authorities, who 80 years ago were established to make sure we had environmental health in our land use planning. Secondly, they then began to look at the municipal governments. For them, municipal governments, if they were in the road of land development thing as they saw them, they just bullied them out of the way. So thirdly, they had absolutely no sense of a responsibility to make land use development and more housing, for example. They made that the enemy of good planning, because for them the natural order was not important, and that's why we became apart. It then became clear they were not only going to undermine municipalities, undermine conservation authorities, undermine regional planning, but they were also now going to take a direct attack on the Greenbelt itself, and particularly in the Rouge Valley by Duffins Creek. And not only was it affecting environmental matters, but even more significantly for some, it was really undermining the ability to have agricultural food security. And so this is a government that, for the point of view of the panel, and I think increasingly more and more people, they, if I could say so, they use the need for housing as a battering ram to get their way. So they put out, and to this day continue, a deception. They argue that we need more housing, and therefore we need more land. They are absolutely right. We need more housing and more affordable housing and more choices for housing for people of different incomes. For absolute sure, it's a crisis we're in. But even their own task force, their own chosen task force from the industry, all right, said it's not a question of land supply. We've got enough land. But that did not matter, because the Ford government has friends in the land development industry that they want to see do well. And those friends have convinced that government that the important thing is to get out of the road and let them do whatever it is they want to do. And so they've said, we need more land. That's an entire deception. It is not true. We need to have affordable housing. So all of that meant that the panel itself, and increasingly other people, said, we're on the wrong wicket here. And not only that, these are people who trade on it's a government that is, in my judgment, is rooted in ignorance and arrogance and uncaring as to the consequences, what we would regard as important consequences. I know that's harsh. I know it's hard, but that's where we are today, and that's why the people who resigned from the panel are active today in the Golden Horseshoe.
Thank you so very much for your candidness. It doesn't surprise me. What does surprise me or encourages me, however, is that while those of us in the environmental community and the affordable housing communities and the democracy community seek a more enlightened, sensitive approach by the Ford government, it's both encouraging and deflating to hear someone like you with such experience and wisdom use the same terminology to describe this government's approach. So I really, really appreciate your candor. So the final question I have, and you really foreshadowed it. You talked about how you're normally a very positive person. Given what we're facing and the both in attitude and in regulatory change. Do you have any advice as to what we can do over the next little while in order to try to enlighten this government?
Well, a couple of things. I guess I start off with a basic philosophy that other people I just took from other people, and that is you have to remember that when it comes to the building of cities, when it comes to land use planning and environmental planning, and this sounds like it's obvious, but somehow it's not obvious to some, and that is that everything is connected to everything else. You can't chop it up and say we're going to do this and it doesn't have an impact somewhere else. The first thing to remember is to remind this government that whatever they do over here will have an impact over there. They should have learned that in school, but they don't practice it. So you begin with the proposition that everything is connected to everything else. Second most important thing to do is to remind yourself that history is really important, and therefore that things that you do today are going to have an impact later on. You may not be around for it, but people will know. And so therefore, the best advice I can give is, first of all, you have to be active. You have to get out there. People have to get out there and say, I belong here. I have a responsibility here. And you'll find if you do, then you'll feel much better about yourself and you can make a contribution. Do I have advice? Yeah, the happiest people I know are the people who out there take advantage of the opportunity to go beyond themselves and deal with matters affecting their community. So that's the best advice I could give to anybody. I almost don't care where you are in the spectrum politically, because I have been around long enough to know that governments of all three political parties have done good things and bad things. And if they do good things, you should help them out. And if they do bad things, you should take them on.
That is just a wonderful précis. I appreciate your time this morning and for sharing your observations and recommendations, which we will as quickly as we can, we'll put this up on YouTube and share it with as many people as we possibly can.